Welcome to this bonus edition of Dare to Think. In my previous episode, I interviewed 3 of my adult students from the Liberty Seminar. What's the Liberty Seminar? It's a 15-week online course that I developed to teach the skills of critical thinking through the Socratic method, while discussing the principles of a free society. The Socratic method is a form of dialogue prompted by open-ended questions, sustained through self-reflection, and promotes engaging dialogue between people, even people who disagree. What you're about to hear is an extra session these students and I recorded after having gone through an entire 15-week course. We're discussing the final chapter of Murray Rothbard's For New Liberty. This chapter is entitled A Strategy for Liberty. And we're discussing Rothbard's ideas about education as the driving force in social and political change. This isn't about the institution of public education, but rather the general education of the individual in how to live free and flourish. At the end of this episode, I'll have more information about how the seminar works and where you or your kids can sign up. Okay, welcome back. I have my adult Liberty Seminar students here from my summer session. We have Tom, Jean, and Rachel, and we are doing an extra session for you guys, but a recorded session for everybody else so that they can hear what one of these what one of these Liberty seminars is like. And so we've just finished For New Liberty by Murray Rothbard, but we touched on some major chapters in his book, and we are ending with the final chapter of For New Liberty by Murray Rothbard, where he's talking about a strategy for achieving a free society. So let's just open this up broadly, and I want to ask you guys what your general impressions of this chapter was. Anybody can start.
I thought Rothbard might be a little naive or a little too optimistic.
Okay. Why do you think that?
Well, the thing in particular that stuck out to me was when he was talking about the media and how the media would be more open to libertarianism. And maybe it was in the 70s, but it's certainly not in 2020.
Yeah. Yeah, I noticed that as well.
So that was the biggest thing that stuck out to me. And some of his other goals and ideas are great ideas. I don't know how well they're being done, especially by the Libertarian Party. I don't know what sort of movements they have on the college campuses. There wasn't a Libertarian Party when I was in college back in the day.
Yeah.
So I don't know how effective they're being at implementing that strategy, or if they're even trying that. But I did like the fact that he made the note that that a movement will become pointless, a mere pointless motion, if it loses sight of the ideology and the goal in view. And I feel like that the Libertarian Party that he talks so highly of in this book has certainly lost sight of the ideology of libertarianism. And now and even in the debate that Nick Sarwark, the former chair, did with Dave Smith, he even basically said, well, we're the Libertarian Party, we're here to get votes. And it's not about the ideology. And so I thought, he nailed it there. And I think that's something that we're seeing come to fruition here 40 years later.
I both agree and disagree with Rachel on that one, because I agree with what she's saying about, he's optimistic about something that maybe I don't feel so optimistic about, but I don't necessarily think it's because the ideology has been lost. I think it's still there. What has changed is now we are so much more advanced, let's say, with our computers and our video games and our phones that we can play with, And I think now the interest more is not so much on what's going on in the world out there as I just want to be entertained now. Our society just wants to be entertained. And I think that's the problem more than losing ideology. So
Interesting.
I
Tom?
I agree with Gene, but I second what Rachel said about the media. When I read that part about the media, and I thought about, CNN and MSNBC and Fox, and I just couldn't believe it. And then furthermore, when you think about the youth, he mentions the campus youth in the book and so forth as being a group. And just look around, and that's all you see is you're talking about socialism and the Bernie Sanders movement and so forth. Now, the other thing is, to be fair to Rothbard, back, I guess, in 73 or 74, he was part of the Libertarian Party, but I believe it was in 1980 when the Libertarians ran, I think it was Ed Clark or something, that there was a big split in the party, and Rothbard went his way with, I believe it was Lou Rockwell, and more with the Ron Paul libertarians, whatever they may be. But I believe that's the big difference. And it would be interesting to see how Rothbard would feel if he was alive today, especially with the fact of who he backed going back in 1990. I believe it was a candidate by the name of Pat Buchanan.
Mm. Yeah, and you guys bring up a good point, because when he mentioned the media, I thought, ooh, that's interesting, because it's not that way anymore. But I can imagine, I mean, I'm still very young and was not alive in the 70s, but I can imagine why he would have thought that the media would be open and on their side. And we'll talk a little bit more about groups in a minute, but I do want to point out, because Rachel, talked about the Libertarian Party and how they seem to have, walked away from the ideology. There is one of the caucuses in the Libertarian Party is the Mises caucus, and they are definitely Rothbardian and are growing by leaps and bounds in order to get the Libertarian Party back on point with the ideology. So at any rate, we'll come back to groups in a second. But now, one of the things that Rothbard does point out is, he says that one of the key strategies for winning people over to libertarianism is education. He's talking about educating others. He's talking about self-education, but he says that there's no magic formula for how to do this. But he says that we have to use persuasion in order to convert people. And this made me think of our previous lesson on manipulation, where we were talking about the difference between influence and manipulation. So how is persuasion related to education? And why is it so important to use persuasion as opposed to manipulation, and why is persuasion more effective?
Well, persuasion, if I remember correctly, there are certain things regarding persuasion versus manipulation. And when you're using influence or persuasion, you have the best interest of all people involved in trying to discuss a matter. There's open communication. There's no threats involved, or there's no putting fear in people, because I think manipulation comes down to a lot of times either gaining something or losing something. Fear is involved. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I don't think you're going to have people, you're not going to convert people or change people's minds if you're trying to manipulate them versus influencing them. And it was interesting when I read this chapter, or this part of the chapter, I went back and thought about what Leonard Read, the founder of the Foundation for Economic Education, always talked about. And it was always about, you can't really do much and influence other people unless you light your fire first. And in other words, he was really into self-improvement, mm-hmm. and knowing your subject and knowing what freedom was all about and being able to discuss it with other people. Right.
Yeah. What do you guys think about that? I mean, and Rothbard mentioned self-education in this, and it seems like, self-education goes along with educating other people. But do you have to be a total expert in libertarian theory in order to actually persuade other people that this is the right way to go?
I don't think so. I mean, I think you can learn through discussing things with others. As far as homeschool and home education goes, I always tell people, look, just if you're afraid to do it, just do it. You can learn alongside your child. And I think you can learn alongside the person you're talking to. And even if you come from an humble point of view and say, look, I don't know all the answers. I can't lay it all out for you, but this is what I'm thinking. And this is what's been said by other people that know, that I respect and agree with. Maybe we can talk through this together and see what's the best way.
Mm-hmm. Jean, what are your thoughts?
Well, I just think if you learned enough about it to where you had information where you could, relay that information to the other individual, then, if you're talking about persuasion, you're not trying to manipulate them. You're just trying to help them to understand your viewpoint. And I think education and in educating yourself is key in enabling yourself to do that,
Mm-hmm. Now it seems to me like it, I'm listening to this and I'm listening to you guys say, hey, persuasion is, considering other people first. It's walking alongside them. It seems like a very, humanitarian way of addressing these issues. And yet there is so much fear, as Tom pointed out, being used right now, not just by the media, but in dialogue on social media. So, and what's strange is that even in that message of fear is sort of this, we have to be caring about others. You have to wear a mask in order to show that you care about others, but we're going to, use coercion to get you to wear the mask. And so they're trying to give this message that they want to have people be compassionate towards each other and think about other people and not ourselves. And yet what you guys are telling me is that persuasion is the way to do that and not manipulation. So why do people use manipulation? Like, why is that even a thing? If persuasion is the actual way to come alongside a person and consider them first.
Truthfully, I would say they haven't considered all the information, and that's because they haven't looked for it.
Or they don't have a strong enough argument as to why people should do it. So we're just going to make them afraid, so they'll do it out of fear.
And when you were saying that or asking that question, Carrie, the thing that popped in my mind was what I read in this chapter, and that was they started to talk about the elites and the interest that the elites have. And they're the people that really are the manipulators, whether it be the state, whether it be the media and so forth, because they're protecting their interests. And as long as whatever group you're talking about here, whether it's the middle class, whether it's the students, as long as they're feeling good about themselves and so forth, they're going to go along with this manipulation, and the elites and the oligarchy is going to continue to rule, and until something finally comes to, as he puts it at the very end, the crisis point.
Yeah, he talks about this crisis situation and that's going to be sort of the tipping point, because if people are comfortable, right, in their situation, if people are comfortable, they're less likely to be motivated to change. Now, one thing that Rothbard does point out, and I want to make this clear, is one of the groups that he brings up as groups that aren't likely to listen to the libertarian message is big business.
Right.
And these are the Lockheed Martins of the world. These are those big corporations who are benefiting from state regulation, or in our case, federal regulation. And yet, one of the greatest complaints coming from people on the left, so these aren't necessarily the politicians, but those people who are enticed by sort of this socialist idea that we need to tax the rich more and things like that. They have this idea about the free market, that the free market produces these big businesses that just sort of run roughshod over us. And Rothbard's sitting here saying, no, these guys are in bed with the state. So what did you guys think about that when he was talking about that? Because I do think that there's relevance with what he was saying, way back in the 70s to what we're experiencing today, even during this COVID situation.
Well, you always say follow the money.
Mm-hmm.
Who's doing that? What's the point of this manipulation? What is who's behind it? Who's pulling the strings?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like you'll hear, and I think I think Biden said this in the last debate, but he brings up how, you have the CEO of Amazon and some of these other major retailers who are just raking in the money from this COVID lockdown, and he's saying this is a bad thing. And yet libertarians would come along and say the reason why that is because we took away, Amazon's competition by shutting them down. And that's anti-free market. So it's interesting. And Rachel, you brought up that that's manipulation. Why don't you talk a little bit more about that? Why is it manipulative to, blame the success of big business on the free market?
It's just, they need somebody to demonize, because it can't ever be their fault. So they're going to blame the big corporations instead of accepting responsibility for allowing themselves to put in place all these regulations that prevent and decrease competition. Mm-hmm. So they would never want to look inside, because if we think it's them that's the enemy, then we're going to turn on them. If they can shift the focus to a big corporation or to somebody else, then we forget who the real enemy is, which is the state.
Mm. Well, Tom, Jean, what do you guys think about that?
Well, I agree with Rachel this time.
And I agree with Rachel, and I think Rothbard was pointing that out as far as he did briefly mention something about when business and government really came together was during the so-called progressive era, when everybody thought that, geez, they were working for the benefit of the, common person and so forth, when really in reality the people that were behind the progressive era were the big businesses back then to prohibit competition, and and the government was all part of this.
Mm-hmm.
And like you pointed out, Carrie, the very companies that benefited the most from the government lockdowns were the big corporations. The mom and pops got shut down. They didn't have a web presence. But so everyone turned to shopping on Amazon or Walmart, and all these people that are supposed to be so horrible, but all they did with their regulations and shutdown was benefit. I mean, every Walmarts are remodeling. They have so much money, they have to spend it to remodel and move everything around. I mean, and then it's like everything they do benefits and empowers the very organizations that they want us to hate.
So are you guys saying that the people, those voters, those people on the left who are upset that only a few corporations are benefiting and benefiting, quite significantly, that those people would actually benefit from having a conversation with a libertarian about, because we have a common cause there. We have some common ground. We both, don't want just a few corporations to benefit. That's something that we object to as well. So is that some common ground that libertarians can have with the left in order to start a dialogue?
Oh, yeah.
Without a doubt. I mean, but in order for that to take place, though, you're going to have to differentiate between what business is and really what government is, because right away those people look at big business as being the culprit, and in turn they turn to the government to want to protect them, when they got to realize what's going on. I often think about the phrase, and I've heard this from so many different people, but people are afraid that the president Trump right now is heading towards fascism. Well, I often ask people to look up the term fascism to see what it is. Fascism, to a certain extent, has been existing in this country for many, many years, if not decades and generations, possibly since FDR.
Yeah. Wow.
It's the cooperation between government and business.
Yeah. That you bring up an interesting point, Tom, because, Rothbard would say, he wrote this book back in the 70s, and he's taking issue with big business and the relationship that big business has with government. So, when you talk to other people who say, Trump is bringing in fascism, and you point this out, do you also then say, hey, this is a point where we actually agree with one another? Do you point out your agreement with them?
Oh, yeah.
I guess to a certain extent I do, but you got to realize who I'm talking to the majority of the time. Okay, it's my fellow baby boomers.
Well,
you can hit certain topics there that really set them off.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, without getting into them.
So is it worth considering, since our goal here is persuasion and not manipulation, is it worth considering that that you could potentially simply say, hey, I actually agree with you, but here's why. So my reasoning for agreeing with you is going to be somewhat different. And hey, this actually started back a long time ago, and let me show you why. Do you think that would actually be persuasive for the people that you're talking to?
It would depend on whether they were a manipulator or not.
Mm.
And you got to realize that the people that I'm talking to, other than maybe, I'm the only one I can think of in the whole group of 200 guys or whatever, and I haven't spoken to all of them, but they're either so pro on one side or so pro on the other side. Mm-hmm. And when you think about it, they each have their special interests, whether it's the military-industrial complex on the one side or whether it's, the unions and other things on the other side, teachers and so forth. And they have their sacred spaces where you can't, God forbid, you say anything.
Yeah, that's we call that the Overton window, and it's pretty narrow right now. So Rothbard, I want to move forward just a little bit. So Rothbard's talking about how, okay, we need to educate ourselves. We need to educate other people. Not everybody is going to receive the message. And, he talks about how people who benefit from the state apparatus and the system as it exists, those people who benefit from the state aren't going to be interested in hearing our message, but rather we need to talk to various groups who are victims of the state and victims of these sorts of policies and regulations. And so he starts to name some groups, and he talks about, and we've already mentioned the campus youth. He talks about media, but I kind of wonder if the equivalent today would be the internet, because that's not controlled by the mainstream media. He talks about middle America. He talks about ethnic groups. So, he's talking about these things in the context of the 1970s, but where do these things apply today? How do we reach the youth today? Are they even a group that we can reach?
As far as the youth of today,
mm-hmm.
I believe they were being reached somewhat going back in 2008 and 2012 by a certain individual. And it fascinated me when he was able to speak to them about End the Fed and some other subjects. Now, for some reason, a lot of them have gone over to the Bernie Sanders side, which it's not fascinating to me, but it just shows me what really makes those people tick.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about that a little bit. Why do you think young people, the individual that you're talking about in 2008 and 2012 was Ron Paul, and Ron Paul was certainly the guy that brought me into the movement. And so I'm a first year millennial. I was born in 81. And but now you have this weird phenomenon, like you said, Tom, that there are, young people who are attracted to Bernie Sanders. So why do you guys think that is, that young people were first attracted to Ron Paul and then that switched to Bernie Sanders? Why do you think that?
They're against the establishment,
Okay.
or they think they're against the establishment.
Yeah, Bernie says he is.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
He definitely posited himself as anti-establishment. That's true. What else?
He's also saying things like free college and free this. He's appealing to them because they want free stuff. And then also, socialism is appealing to people who don't know what the end result of socialism is. Saying we want to provide for everybody, we want medical care for all. That's very appealing. It sounds great because, especially people that age, they have ideals of, we want the world to be wonderful and happy and everybody to be equal.
Mm-hmm.
And so it sounds great on the surface.
Yeah. Tom, what were you going to say?
But contrast that with what Ron Paul was saying back in those 2008, 2012, was the direct opposite.
Well, but to play devil's advocate, Ron Paul was pointing out that there were problems with, the way the federal government, for example, issued student loans to everybody, right? Okay. He did point that out. And certainly for my generation was taught, if you go to school, if you get a college degree, you're going to get a great job and you're going to be fine. You're going to be the middle American, right? At least. And for my generation, it didn't turn out that way. And the cost of college just kept going up. And so the cost of our debt just kept going up. So given that context, does it seem reasonable that somebody who comes along and says, hey, this was caused by, various kinds of predatory lending, which it was. And so the solution to this is to just give you free college. Can you understand why that might be enticing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And that probably goes back to us trying to educate or persuade those individuals, especially of college age, what really is causing the problem, if they would be receptive to that, I guess, depending on how you can, influence them. But I think maybe Ron Paul had a very interesting point back in those years when he brought up the topic of end the Fed. And most people don't realize how much effect, if in total, the Fed has on what happens to our money and the economy in this country.
Yeah. So do you think we've lost, one advantage that Ron Paul had that, other libertarian candidates like Joe Jorgensen, for example, don't have, is that he had a space on that debate stage. And Ron Paul will tell you that even when he ran for Congress the very first time, he wasn't intending on winning. He wasn't running to win. He was running to leverage the platform that would be given to him as a candidate. And so he constantly used the platform that he was given in order to spread this message. So, the platform that he has now is much smaller. It's sort of absorbed into the rest of the internet. But we also have, at least from my perspective, I think we have many more organizations who are advocating for liberty in various ways. And as far as, Campus Youth is concerned, they have Young Americans for Liberty. They have, what is it called? I'm forgetting the name of it. Huh?
Students for Liberty.
Students for Liberty is what I'm thinking of. Yeah. So they do have some young organizations. I know Foundation for Economic Education is geared towards young people. So if you had to, just taking what you've learned from this course, from this seminar, not just from Rothbard and the lessons, but from what you've learned about critical thinking and the Socratic method, what could you guys do as individuals to to facilitate sort of these conversations with people that, we do have common ground with, but initially might be turned off because they think that we're just pro-capitalist pigs.
Well, I think we could just try and help them to understand that there's a different position, a different idea, and just give them some ideas about what it is, and not so much to completely educate them, but in hopes that they would go out and seek more education on it, get them interested, get them curious, that kind of an idea.
Well, Scott Horton always says attack the left from the left and the right from the right. So you find areas of common ground, and then you just say, okay, I agree with you on this, but I have a different perspective on how we got there, or what the cause of the problem is, or what the solution for the problem is, and just introduce that idea to them so that maybe they'll think about it. If they're intellectually curious, that it might prompt them to think about it. If some people are just closed-minded, so they think this is the only way that you can think about something. And so you kind of have to figure out, am I casting my pearls before swine? Or is this somebody who actually might take what I'm saying to heart and maybe think about it in a different way?
What I find with the people in my age group and so forth is this word patriotism comes into play so much, and it's so hard for them not to separate country and government. And it's like banging your head against a brick wall, to the point where I'll just say, well, it's not worth it. It really isn't, because just an example, everybody was talking about the debate after Tuesday night on Wednesday, and I just turned around and I said, it doesn't say much for the American people if you're going to vote for either one of those clowns. And they just looked at me like, well, who are you going to vote for? Well, I don't know what I'm going to vote, or if I'm going to vote for whoever it is. But the thing is, as long as people continue to have those feelings and think that they need to vote for one of those individuals, things are never going to change. But they're afraid that if they don't vote for that one individual, that other person's going to get in who they hate so much. That could really be that could make the elite crumble if people could get that through their head.
So this is interesting because you brought feelings back up again. We've talked about feelings sort of, on the edge of things. And I think we agree that manipulation has something to do with feelings. Ben Shapiro famously quipped that facts don't care about your feelings. But let me ask you guys, do feelings care about facts?
Yeah, I think so.
Tom, what do you think? Do feelings care about facts?
Yes and no.
Why?
Well, if they're facts that affirm what you feel already.
Well, are those necessarily facts? I mean, if they're just, we've talked about confirmation bias. If they're just confirming bias, are those genuine facts?
Well, if they're genuine facts and people believe that they're genuine facts, yes. But if not, I mean, people, I know people that think certain things are facts, that they're the furthest thing from a fact or truth.
So I asked this question, Tom, because you brought up the boomers that you're friends with and how they can't separate patriotism from what we would call nationalism. But would it benefit those conversations if you pointed out the fact that patriotism in America meant dissent and disagreement and distrust of your government and things like that?
I have tried that already. In fact, I've even asked the question, were the founding fathers, were the people that were involved in the Revolutionary War, were they patriots or traitors? And I can't tell you the looks I got.
Really? What they say? I'm very curious.
They were patriots to America. This is what you're
traitors to the crown.
This is what you're dealing with. It's the same thing when you talk about people are still obsessed with that country called Iran.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you, I see not good things happening over the next 4 years, no matter who gets in for Iran. And I hope I'm dead wrong.
Yeah.
But people only think about Iran going back to 1979. They forget about 1953
Mm-hmm.
and even prior to that.
So, okay. So now Rothbard, I want to go back to Rothbard and point out the groups that he mentions, right? He's talking about ethnic groups. He's talking about middle America. He's talking about the campus youth. We're talking about, and Tom, you've had a problem with sort of that older generation, and there's something to be said about, and Rothbard mentions this about why younger people are more open to ideas. So it makes sense then that he would say that education needs to be geared towards the younger generations. I want to talk about ethnic groups really quick because we have Black Lives Matter, and you do have. I will give credit where credit is due. Spike Cohen, who is the vice presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party, has sought out and has sought out people from BLM in order to make inroads with their group and offer them the libertarian message. So what do you guys think about that? What do you guys think about, the idea of empathizing enough with the Black Lives Matter movement to say, hey, we have some common ground. Let's talk about how we got to this point, what we've been talking about, and what we are arguing the solutions are. How important is that?
I think if you're dealing with people who weren't the founders, you might have some success. But if you're dealing with full-blown Marxists, and that's their ideology, their solutions are very different than our solutions. They're, we're based on property rights and don't hurt people and don't take their stuff. And they're based on the opposite. But there are a lot of people involved with the Black Lives Matter movement that don't subscribe to the Marxist ideology. They just see that there's something broken that needs to be fixed. And so I think that we could take this message to those people if they're not Marxist. I mean, trying to convert them is going to be difficult.
Well, and I wonder how many of them are genuinely committed to Marxism. I mean, I know that you got the founders who are absolutely committed. You have some of these, fringe groups who definitely have demonstrated that they are committed to the Marxist agenda. But just in your interactions with people, every day, whether it be on social media or at work or whatnot, how many of those people do you think are actually committed Marxists?
Not many. And the reason I say that is because they got Joe Biden signs up at the same time they have the BLM sign.
Yeah.
It's just, what can I say? I think there's a way you can work with some of those people that are really not heavily involved in that organization. But I do find it quite interesting what over the past 2 weeks, the BLM website took down the one view that they had or whatever regarding the nuclear family. I find that very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I do think it's interesting. Now, one of the things that Rothbard points out is that over the course of this, over the course of time of our, attempting to make inroads and persuade other people, he talks about, and also as the state continues to grow and grow, he says that there will be a decay in the will of the elite to rule. Now, this is interesting, especially in light of COVID, and I really want to touch on this because I've seen some situations where rulers have acquiesced and said, nope, this is too much, and then I've seen rulers try and amp it up and kick up their tyrannical rules. So what do you guys think about that? Do you think that Rothbard was right, that there would be a decay in the will to rule?
I believe
I don't think we're
Okay.
seeing that right now.
No?
I think they want to rule every facet of our life. But then you've also got these cities where they tell the police to stand down. I guess it depends on who they're wanting to rule over at the moment.
I do believe it's promising. But whether or not anything of great value comes about is another story. And the reason for that, I feel, because if you look throughout history, all revolutions are when governments have withered away or another tyrannical form of government has taken over. And when you look at who people turn to in this country, just look at the individuals running. Nothing's going to change much.
So I want to use a couple of examples, because three examples came to my mind when I read this part about, a decay in the will to rule. The first example was, of course, my own governor, Michelle Lujan Grisham, who, man, she is really kicking it up. She's even talking about limiting our outings to 3 a day. It's like, what, really?
Oh my gosh.
And here you have Florida and now Mississippi. So Florida has said we're reopening and we're not going to shut back down. And you have Mississippi, who just lifted their mask mandate. And you have some other states that never shut down at all or instituted any sort of mandates, at least as far as the COVID recommendations are considered. So you do have some states where the will to rule has been amped up. And then you have these other states where the will to rule has decayed. And so moving forward, there seems to be a split that's happening. At least that's what it looks like to me. There seems to be a split. One of the other things that the New Mexico governor has done, Grisham, is she's allowed New Mexicans to travel to certain states and not have to quarantine when they come back. And if you look at these states, they happen to be run by Democratic governors. So at any rate, I do think this is interesting. You do have, Tom, you mentioned the revolutions throughout history, or the falls of empires and how that creates these power vacuums and so forth. Is it possible that part of the libertarian message and the effort at persuasion that we have set before us is to persuade people that we don't actually need to prop up another leader? Is the mistake in the past that we've thought, oh, our system has just fallen and now we need a new leader to lead us out of this crisis? So is our message that we don't actually need a leader to do that?
I believe the message should be along those lines, and maybe more so along the lines of how in the world can a group of people in one little center of the United States rule over 330 million people? It's time that we decentralize. And the one good thing about COVID, other than for what Trump did in the very beginning, was he saw this decentralization in the individual states with people making their decisions, the governors. Some very tyrannical and others not so much. But I think a big part and a good message in this for this that maybe change is not to look for some kind of central leader, but to look for decentralization of the power structure in this country.
Jean, Rachel, any thoughts?
That's the argument that I've been making is, it doesn't matter who the president is. The wars are going to rage on. The debt is going to continue to increase. So our best hope is to try to influence local politics, because it wasn't the federal government that shut the small businesses down. It was our county. It was our city. It was our state. And if we can focus on those areas that we can actually control and decentralize, we have a greater chance at liberty than we do by trying to influence national politics.
Jean?
Well, I'm certainly ready to try something new and not have a central government, something that's not corrupted. I dream of that happening. I'm not optimistic that it will happen, but I certainly would be willing to contribute a considerable amount of money towards it. That's for sure.
So this is a perfect segue then, because Rothbard in the 1970s was very optimistic. I don't know that he ever lost that optimism. Maybe he did. But at least in this book, in this final chapter, he has reason to be optimistic, and he's got a couple of reasons. He, of course, acknowledges that the road to liberty is difficult. You can't plan it. You don't know what's going to happen. Like, you can't predict its steps. But what was one of the reasons that he gave that we should be ultimately optimistic about liberty for the future and a free society?
I think it was because he saw what is in place now as failing.
Mm-hmm. That's true, but why did he see it? Why did he see that was going to inevitably fail and liberty would inevitably succeed?
Because it was against human nature.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So say more about that. Why does a free society? Why can we be optimistic about the current structure failing because it's antithetical to human nature? What's significant about human nature?
I think human beings want to be free, and we all have something to contribute to society if we're free to do so. You just can't, and the state can't plan on things happening, because everything comes down to an individual doing something. It comes down to an individual human action in order for things to take place. And obviously, if you really look at the track record of what has taken place in this country, and government has grown leaps and bounds, look at the crisis that we're at this time. So maybe this is the time to really try to reach people so that they realize that the answer is within each and every one of us, and not in some superpower entity known as the state or government.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. One of the things that Rothbard says here, and I'm going to quote him, he says, "It will eventually become clear that the world will have to adopt freedom and the free market as a requisite for industry to survive and flourish." So we've had our economy locked down worldwide, right? It's a worldwide lockdown. There have been, various places that either didn't shut down or didn't shut down entirely. Other places are starting to reopen. You definitely have certain rulers who are trying to double down and control everything. But Rothbard is saying that it will become very clear to the individuals of the world, to people in the world, so not just people in America, but what he talks about is the dream for a free society across the entire world, right? That eventually people will adopt freedom because that's the only way, because they will see finally that the socialistic scheme or the central planning scheme doesn't work. You can't actually centrally plan, anything, whether it's an immune response to a pandemic or or education or technology or things like that. So a lot of you, all three of you, to varying degrees, have said that you're not actually optimistic about the future. But I wonder if part of Rothbard's optimism was embodied in the fact that he realized that the failure had to happen. We had to go through and we had to see the failure first. So given that idea, does that influence your pessimism or optimism about a free society in the future?
Well, he must have saw the failure is coming a lot sooner than what I do, I guess.
Interesting. Say more about that. You don't think it'll happen soon?
Well, and things happen so quickly sometimes that you wonder why you didn't see it coming too, So I certainly don't know the future. But I guess things have just been heading in a downward trend for so long now that I guess maybe I've just become pessimistic.
Well, I mean, it probably, I don't know, maybe it all depends on what happens with this vaccine. If they rush this vaccine, it comes out, they force a bunch of people to take it, and then there's a catastrophic failure of the vaccine and a lot of people get injured from it. Maybe that will shake people's faith in the state. But they have the bully pulpit. They can print money. They don't even have to print it anymore. They can just click a couple of computer buttons and create more money. So, I mean, unless something more critical, I mean, if they haven't woken up, if the population hasn't woken up to the idea that the government ruins everything they touch over the past few months, what else is it going to take for them to finally realize that central planning doesn't work? That should be painfully obvious to most anybody with eyes.
Well, and does everybody have to come to this realization? Like, do we need the entire world to wake up like at the same time?
No, because look at the number of people that, really fought the American Revolution, and so forth. It's always a remnant, or only a few, or whatever. But at times, I'm optimistic when I see what's been going on the past 6, 7, 8 months. And then there's times when I think because when you look at this country, there's a lot of gun owners in this country, and they're getting, I think, fed up. But unfortunately, unless they're educated in the right way, they're the same people that have a Trump-Pence flag hanging out their house and a "Don't Tread on Me" flag. I don't think that's the direction we want to go in.
Yeah, well, it seems a little self-contradictory. So, okay, we need to wrap this up. But why don't you guys? We've just come back around to education. Thomas has said we need to educate people. And so, how might you set out from this point forward? What might you do differently than you were doing before in order to get this message out there?
As far as I'm concerned, I still need to work on what I had previously mentioned as far as objectives, or whatever the case may be, and learn how to be a less emotional person, stay calm, and just present my views. And if people accept them, that's great. And if I can get them to just even concede on a point or two, or come to an agreement, that will be great also. It's not going to be an easy job. I don't think it was ever meant to be an easy job. After all, Rothbard wrote this book in 1973, and he thought it was coming pretty soon. And we've already gone how many years after that? But I don't think he ever envisioned or ever went through what we've gone through since about 2001. That's endless wars, even though the United States has always been involved in wars. And furthermore, a situation like this pandemic. So maybe this will finally break, and the people that don't really go to the voting booth, as far as Americans, they may finally start voicing their opinion in some form or fashion. But, education is very important, and I think we need to take every opportunity to educate people, but in a way that we're trying to influence them, and not in a manipulative or an angered way, emotional way.
Okay. Rachel and Jean?
Well, I think something I would do different would be to keep myself more, educated on this, keep it fresh in mind, so that if I get an opportunity or whatever to share with somebody a different idea, that I could at least maybe articulate it with them in a way that made sense to them, keep it simple, know enough to be able to keep it simple and know what I'm talking about, so that maybe they could catch on. That would be something different.
Okay. Rachel?
I'm not sure.
That's okay. That's okay, because and I want to point this out. Remember that I accepted I don't know as a satisfactory answer in the seminar. Well, thank you guys so much for your willingness to undertake this Liberty seminar with me, for walking through it with me, for trusting me to to walk through you guys or walk through Rothbard with us and help you guys think through it and, bring some of these ideas out, but also bring out these skills of critical thinking that I hope you will take and practice more. So thank you so much for that. And to our audience, if you are listening to this and you are interested in the Liberty Seminar, I encourage you to visit my website, courses.mereliberty.com, where you can get more information on this. And with that, do you guys have any other thoughts or final comments you want to say?
No, I just want it's really been a pleasure having you lead us, Carrie, and to be a part of this with Jean and Rachel. Thank you.
Thank you.
I've enjoyed it as well. 45 minutes of good stimulating conversation has been a nice reprieve for the past 15 weeks.
Yeah,
that's
I
good.
agree.
That's good.
I definitely agree with that.
I'm so happy to hear that. It was always a joy to have these conversations with you. All right, very good. Well, as usual, you guys have a good weekend, and I hope to hear back from you soon.
Everybody take care. Great.
Thanks.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye. You might be inclined to think these students are naturally inclined to have this kind of dialogue, but not so. Rachel was a very quiet student in the beginning. Tom had a greater tendency to respond with knee-jerk answers. Jean was less inclined to listen to views he disagreed with. The aim of the Socratic method is to teach you to be a better thinker, so that you can have more productive and fruitful dialogues with others. Interested in hearing more? The Liberty Seminar is available to 3 different age groups: middle school, high school, and adults. Students get a lesson each week delivered to their inbox, which they can complete at their leisure. At the end of the week, students in each group meet for a virtual seminar session online to discuss the lesson and practice the skills of critical thinking. There are plenty of opportunities to stretch your brain, and we have a ton of fun. You can find student testimonials along with information for registration on my website, courses.mereliberty.com.